You know that feeling at the beginning of a new month when you tell yourself this is the reset, the month when you finally track everything properly, stop leaking money in stupid places, clean up the card balance, fix the routine, and start acting like the version of yourself who seems calm and financially organized. That moment feels responsible, and it feels mature, which is exactly why so many people trust it more than they should. Because a lot of people are not financially stuck because they never try. They are financially stuck because they keep restarting. They keep rebuilding the budget, rebuilding the savings plan, rebuilding the debt strategy, rebuilding the daily routine, and every reset quietly drops them back near the bottom of the hill they were already halfway up. That pattern is expensive in a way most people never calculate, because it does not look reckless while it is happening. We usually imagine the big money problems as loud ones, like financing a luxury car, making emotional purchases, taking on dumb debt, or doing something obviously irresponsible in public. But one of the most expensive patterns in adult life is much quieter than that, because it looks like self-awareness, good intentions, and the desire to get your life together. It looks like telling yourself that this week got messy, this month did not count, the system needs a better reset, and next time you will do it properly instead of continuing with something imperfect. That is where the hidden cost begins, because money does not reward dramatic restarts nearly as much as it rewards continuity. My name is Nick, and if you have ever felt like you are always trying to improve your financial life, but never getting real traction, this is probably going to explain the pattern more clearly than most normal budgeting advice ever does. Because the issue is often not laziness, and it is often not even lack of discipline. The issue is that your system is built around heroic recommitment instead of stable momentum. What starting over actually looks like. Starting over does not usually look dramatic when it shows up in real life, and that is one reason it survives for so long without getting questioned. It looks like making a clean budget on Sunday, breaking it by Thursday, and deciding to restart next month when life is less chaotic and you can do it the right way. It looks like building a savings streak for a few weeks, dipping into it during one stressful stretch, then emotionally giving up because the system no longer feels clean enough to continue. It looks like getting serious about debt, having one expensive weekend, feeling discouraged by the setback, and slipping into avoidance because the plan now feels damaged instead of active. It looks like buying groceries with good intentions, getting tired, wasting half of them, ordering takeout 3 nights in a row, and promising yourself that next week will be the real comeback. It looks like opening an investment account, contributing consistently for a while, stopping when cash feels tight, and returning months later as if the gap did not matter. It also looks like deleting apps, downloading new ones, making fresh rules, reorganizing everything, and constantly building new systems that never stay alive long enough to become useful. That is the trap, because none of this feels crazy while you are doing it. It feels like someone who cares, someone who is trying, someone who still believes progress is possible. And to be fair, that part is true. But effort and continuity are not the same thing, and financially the difference between those two things is huge. A lot of stressed people put out enormous amounts of effort, but what they do not get is uninterrupted motion, and uninterrupted motion is what lets money start helping instead of constantly needing rescue. Why your brain loves the reset. The reason this pattern is so common is not because people are secretly irrational in some cartoonish way. It is because your brain loves the emotional relief of a fresh start. Psychologists sometimes call part of this the clean slate effect, which is the tendency to feel unusually motivated by temporal landmarks like Monday, the first of the month, a birthday, the new year, or even the morning after a bad week. A fresh start creates emotional distance from the recent version of you, which makes it easy to think that messy version was temporary, and the new version is the real one. That sounds harmless. But there is a catch, because the reset itself creates a feeling of control before you have done the difficult part, which is staying consistent when life becomes annoying. So the beginning starts to feel productive even when very little has actually changed. You feel organized when you write the new rules, you feel disciplined when you make the spreadsheet, and you feel hopeful when the system looks clean again, even if it falls apart the moment the week becomes crowded. That hope is emotionally powerful, and it can become addictive. People end up chasing the emotional high of recommitment, because recommitment feels like movement even when it is mostly relief. There is another problem hiding underneath that one. which is that maintenance is boring. Maintenance does not make you feel like a transformed person, and it does not give you a dramatic story about your life. Maintenance is just repeating reasonable behavior while nothing exciting happens. And the reason that matters is simple, because wealth is mostly built in maintenance mode. It is built in the months where the transfers go through, the spending stays mostly stable, the card balance keeps shrinking, and the system survives ordinary life without needing a grand emotional restart. People love the fantasy of transformation, but money usually rewards repetition. That gap between what feels inspiring and what actually works is where a lot of financial progress quietly dies. The first hidden cost, recovery spending. The first cost of constant restarting is recovery spending, and this is one of the sneakiest leaks in ordinary adult life. When a plan breaks, people rarely just pause in a neutral way because they usually compensate. They order convenience food because the groceries went bad, take Ubers because the schedule got chaotic, miss a payment because they stopped looking, let subscriptions pile up because checking feels annoying, and spend in small, messy ways that never appear in the official plan but absolutely show up in the account. A bad week is expensive enough on its own, but restart cycles make bad weeks worse because they turn a temporary disruption into a spending phase. This is why one chaotic stretch can feel strangely costly even when you did not make one giant purchase, because the money disappeared through friction, convenience, fatigue, and little acts of self-rescue. None of those purchases feel important individually, but together they create a pattern that keeps punishing instability. That is what makes recovery spending so dangerous, because it does not feel like irresponsibility, it feels like getting through the week. And sometimes that is exactly what it is, but financially the effect is the same. Your money still leaves, your system still loses momentum, and the return to normal becomes more expensive than it needed to be. The second hidden cost, reentry friction. The second cost is reentry friction, which is what happens every time you stop long enough that restarting becomes a project. Once the system goes cold, you have to decide everything again: how much you are saving now, which debt matters most now, what the budget is now, which subscriptions stay, what groceries make sense, how much you can invest, and what rules you are following this time. That may not look like a financial cost on paper, but it absolutely becomes one in real life. Because decision fatigue pushes people toward delay, convenience, and avoidance, and all three of those behaviors cost money. A simple system that stays warm is easier to continue than a perfect system that keeps collapsing and demanding a full relaunch. The people who manage money well are often not living inside some magical state of discipline. They just do not force themselves to rebuild the machine every time life gets messy. That matters more than most productivity advice admits. Because every time reentry becomes emotionally heavy, the gap between disruption and recovery gets longer, and the longer that gap lasts, the more the costs spread into the rest of your financial life. The third hidden cost, staying a beginner. The third cost is that constant restarting keeps you financially inexperienced, even if you have been trying to improve for years. When you always interrupt yourself, you never get the full benefit of familiarity, and familiarity is where money gets cheaper. You do not get good at managing low-energy weeks, good at maintaining a lean grocery rhythm, good at handling small surprises without derailing the month, good at investing through discomfort, or good at paying down debt without turning every setback into a personal crisis. You just keep relearning the first part. You stay in the stage where every disruption feels like proof that the whole system failed, instead of treating disruption like a normal part of operating adult life. That matters because beginner mistakes are rarely free. Beginner grocery behavior wastes food. Beginner budgeting creates fantasy numbers. Beginner debt plans collapse under pressure. And beginner investing gets interrupted by every awkward month. If you are always returning to the first chapter, you keep paying first chapter costs. That is one reason people can spend years caring about money without feeling financially stronger, because caring is not enough if the system never stays alive long enough to mature. The biggest cost, compounding hates interruptions. The biggest cost of all is that compounding hates stop-start behavior. This is where the math starts becoming painful, because money needs time and motion more than it needs dramatic bursts of motivation. Imagine two people who both want to invest $500 a month, and both use the same boring index fund earning around 8% a year over time. Person A stays in motion and invests that $500 every month for 10 years, and at the end of that period, they have roughly $91,000. Person B has the same intention and the same basic capacity, but 3 months out of every year disappear into chaos, recovery, excuses, or some temporary survival mode. So they only invest during 9 months out of 12. After the same 10 years, that person ends up with roughly $69,000. That is a gap of more than $22,000. And what makes it so brutal is that person B does not even look wildly irresponsible in that example. They are not doing anything cinematic. They are just interrupting themselves often enough that money never gets the uninterrupted runway it needs. Stretch that same pattern out over 20 years, and the gap becomes much larger, not because one person had more talent, but because one person kept continuity alive. This is what people miss when they think progress is mostly about intensity. Compounding does not care how motivated you felt during the reset. It cares how often you stayed in motion when the excitement wore off. Debt gets worse the same way. Debt punishes interruption in the exact opposite direction, which is what makes stop-start behavior so expensive on both sides of the balance sheet. Let us say you have $8,000 on a credit card at 22% interest, and you decide to attack it with $400 a month. If you keep going without repeatedly reopening the wound, the balance disappears in about 26 months, and you pay a little over $2,000 in interest along the way. Now imagine the same person keeps having reset seasons, and every few months life gets messy, they lose momentum, or they add another $1,200 back onto the card while promising themselves they will clean it up later. Now the debt drags out for roughly 39 months instead of 26, and the interest bill rises from a little over $2,000 to more than $3,600. That means the pattern created around 13 extra months of debt and roughly $1,600 of extra interest, which is a serious price for behavior that most people would describe as falling off track for a bit. That phrase sounds innocent, but the math is not innocent. Every interruption feeds the thing you were trying to escape, and the longer the cycle repeats, the more expensive recovery becomes. People usually think the enemy is the debt itself, but a lot of the time the real enemy is the inability to keep steady pressure on it for long enough. This shows up in your income too. The cost of restarting does not stop at spending and debt, because it also shows up in the way people build earning power. Think about two people who both want to improve their income over the next 3 years. One spends those years steadily building one useful skill, even when progress feels slow, even when the early results are awkward, and even when the middle part is boring. The other person keeps restarting their self-improvement life every few months. 1 month it is coding, then content, then a course, then a side hustle, then a certification, then a totally new plan because the last one stopped feeling exciting. The first person is bored sometimes, but they build compounding skill. The second person stays emotionally stimulated, but stays shallow. And shallow progress rarely pays well. Income tends to rise when trust rises, when competence rises, when reputation rises, and when other people can clearly see value that has been built over time. All of that depends on continuity. Your career usually does not improve because you had one inspired weekend and made a dramatic promise to yourself. It improves because you stayed with something long enough to become useful at it. That is why starting over can quietly cap your income even when you feel ambitious all the time. Ambition without continuity often turns into motion without accumulation. Why normal money advice fails here? This is one reason so much ordinary money advice quietly fails in real life, because it assumes a version of you that is always rested, organized, emotionally steady, socially unpressured, never behind on life admin, never working late, and never making decisions while tired. That version of you exists sometimes, but it is not your full life. So people build financial systems for their best week, then act shocked when the whole thing collapses during a normal week. That is not really a discipline problem, it is a design problem. A plan that only works when you are functioning at 95% is not a strong plan. It is a fragile plan. And fragile plans are expensive because they keep forcing restart cycles. The better question is not, what would the perfect version of me do every month? The better question is, what can I keep alive even when life gets annoying? That is a far more useful financial question because it leads to systems that can survive reality instead of looking impressive for a few clean days. How to stop making restarts so expensive. The first thing you need is a floor instead of a fantasy. A floor is the minimum version of your system that still counts, like saving $50 when you wanted to save $500, paying something extra toward debt even when you cannot do the full amount, making 3 easy meals instead of attempting a perfect grocery week, or investing a smaller amount instead of stopping entirely. Floors protect continuity, and continuity is worth more than intensity for almost everything that compounds. The second thing is to stop fully stopping. This is huge because when people feel behind, they often shut the entire system down. They stop checking accounts, stop investing, stop tracking, stop making extra debt payments, stop cooking, and stop looking because they want to restart later when it can feel clean again. Do not do that. Reduce the system, simplify the system, shrink the behavior if you need to, but keep it alive. A tiny version of the system is almost always better than a dead version of the system. The third thing is to make recovery immediate instead of ceremonial. You do not need a new month, a new app, a new Monday, a new notebook, or a new identity. You need the next useful action. That might be making one transfer, paying the card today, cooking the next meal, deleting one subscription, or checking the account before bed. The faster you return to motion, the less expensive the disruption becomes. The fourth thing is to stop buying the feeling of change. A lot of people spend money trying to feel organized enough to become the person who will finally stop wasting money. So they buy planners, apps, journals, containers, courses, productivity tools, and little systems of self-improvement that mainly serve one purpose, making the reset feel official. Sometimes tools genuinely help, but a lot of the time they just let you shop for the feeling of progress without doing the part that actually creates progress. A new system is not always a step forward, because sometimes it is just prettier procrastination. The fifth thing is to protect your continuity infrastructure, which means the boring pieces of life that keep money moving even when your motivation disappears. Automatic transfers matter, autopay matters, a default grocery list matters, a small emergency buffer matters, a recurring money check-in matters, and a low-friction way to see your numbers matters. None of those things are exciting, but they stop temporary stress from turning into a full reset, and that alone can save an enormous amount of money over time. The real upgrade. When people imagine someone who is good with money, they often picture a highly disciplined person who is extremely optimized, deeply self-controlled, and always making perfect choices. In real life, a financially strong person is often just someone whose system does not collapse every time they have a human week. That is a much better goal. You do not need to become perfect, and you do not need to become some kind of machine, but you do need to become harder to interrupt. That is the real upgrade. Not becoming flawless, becoming durable. Because durable people get compounding. Durable people keep pressure on debt long enough to break it. Durable people spend less on recovery and less on chaos. And durable people stay with valuable skills long enough for those skills to pay them back. Over time, that difference becomes enormous, even when it looks boring from the outside. This is why two people with similar incomes can end up in completely different places, because one of them keeps needing a new beginning while the other one keeps protecting momentum. One person lives in cycles, the other person lives in continuation. That does not sound dramatic, but it is often the difference between always feeling almost in control and actually building something solid. The part that should stay with you. If your financial life has felt like a loop where you keep getting serious and somehow ending up back at the beginning, do not just ask yourself how to become more motivated. Ask yourself how to become less restart dependent. That is a better question, because your future is probably not being destroyed by one giant mistake. It is probably being shaped by whether your systems can survive ordinary life without needing a full emotional reset every time something goes wrong. Wealth is not only built by acceleration, because a surprising amount of it is built by not forcing yourself back to zero. The people who get ahead are often not the people with the most dramatic breakthrough story. They are the people whose money finally gets enough uninterrupted time to work. That is what you want. Not a more intense Monday, not a prettier plan, and not a more convincing speech to yourself at the beginning of next month. You want a financial life that stays in motion. Because once that happens, the math finally starts helping you instead of punishing you. Your effort starts lasting, and adult life becomes a lot less expensive than it used to be.